Hello and welcome to the Overland Journal podcast. I'm your host, Scott Brady. I'm here with my illustrious co-host, Matt Scott.
I am here.
And we're going to start off with a rant warning because this is pretty much, I suspect.
Yeah, it's going to be a bit gatekeepy and a bit ranty. And
so we're going to have some fun today talking about the things that we're told that we need to overland, but that we actually don't
actually need. Yeah,
which is essentially everything. Given the fact
it's a lot. It's weird.
Given the fact that people have traveled around the world on a stock motorcycle.
So and I think one of the conversations we were having before we did this is that we've realized this huge kind of growing divide between people who are actually traveling that I call overlanders.
Sure.
And for the purposes of this conversation, it's the guys that aren't doing it full time and aren't doing it often that
have
think
most things
that they need so much stuff.
And that's the reason why we wanted to do the podcast, is that if you look at the Instagram feeds, it's always these very overbuilt vehicles. It's all of this pressure to purchase all of these things. And one of the goals 20 years ago when we started all of this stuff, and you've been involved with it for over a decade with the content that we produce, and the goal has always been to reinforce that travel is the goal. So we've talked about this before, but I guess like the first checkpoint along the way is to ask yourself, am I spending more money on the vehicle than I am on traveling?
Yeah.
And maybe make that just be, if that's like the one thing that everybody takes away from this conversation of, because think about it, if somebody's got tons of cash and they want to have a super fancy vehicle, that's fine.
Yeah.
But at least they're able to still travel the way that they want to travel.
For sure. I mean, and I'll call myself out here. Like most listeners know, I travel in an Earth Roamer. I have a wine rack. I have the fancy lights that we're gonna kind of riff on. I have a lot of this stuff.
Yeah.
I like to think that we use it, but
you also know you don't need it.
I don't need it.
Yeah. And I think that that's for me too. I mean, if I look back at all of my earliest overland project vehicles, they were terrible. I mean, they were so overloaded, overdone. I remember
they weren't like terrible.
They were pretty terrible.
You've been on Instagram lately.
They were pretty terrible. They were pretty terrible. If I look at my Tacoma, it was like just as bad as all the ones of today, where I was way over payload.
Yeah.
I don't remember the brand of the lights, but I had like 4 spot beams on like this.
Oh, you had the Hellas on like the OGs or something. That pre-runner rack?
This big pre-runner light rack.
Yeah.
It was terrible. I mean, I drilled through the roof of my truck and like had to build in all of this structure for lights that I turned on for a couple photographs. Like they were never necessary.
Yeah.
So I just think back on so many of my own projects. And then recently my vehicles basically are staying stock. Like the AT4 put on a nice suspension, just something that helped give me a little bit of lift and some better payload. And
you didn't even have anything on that.
I had nothing.
You used the crap out of it.
I didn't do anything to the car. So I put some nice tires on it. That was it.
It's interesting. So obviously we've both been in the travel or overland community for quite a while. And a lot of this podcast started, I occasionally rant about things on my Instagram. And again,
Matt, you never rant.
Oh yeah, I do. Oh yeah, baby. Yeah. And it was funny. So all of these like legitimate traveler friends start messaging me, and I start having all these amazing conversations on how you just don't need this stuff, and how a lot of the way people are building, it's a fascinating thing to me. So like the way, let's just say there's the travelers and the non-travelers, the way the non-travelers are building their vehicles, who honestly are the people who have kind of the lion's share of influence. Mm-hmm. They honestly get made fun of by the travelers. You see this like built Tacoma with long travel and 6 or 7 lights on the roof and A-pillar lights and light bars in the bumper and fog light LEDs.
If you're like, I want to build my truck.
It's become cliche.
Yeah,
let's say it that way. It's like people are just building things in such a certain way that they actually have no use for. That is like very interesting. Like when I see.
Do you think it's social pressure? Do you think?
I think it's a lot of social pressure, and I think that we should dive into this. Let's look at like the Instagram thing. So there's the influencers, friends with a lot of these people, great people, but how it works is they'll get approached by lighting company A, suspension company B, or whatever, and a lot of these guys are getting paid. There's influencers that all of the people listening to this podcast probably follow that I know are making $100,000 from just like to run this widget. And it's crazy. And it starts to influence this and create this new norm of what people think is reality, and that's what they need, but it's really just marketing. Companies have, and like, hey, I did it too with MaxTrax, but you're leveraging audiences to.
Although you don't pay people to run.
We've never paid somebody. Yeah, I mean, we sponsor Overland, but.
Well, no, that's advertising.
That's advertising. Yeah, we always had a thing of.
You don't do influencer marketing.
I don't know what the new direction for MaxTrax will do, but we had a policy of just like authentic people, using the stuff. But now there's the Overland market's big, and people are actually getting paid to have these products, and that's fine. People have to make a living, and photography's hard, and creating this content is work. But it's important for people to recognize reality and advertisement. So you start seeing very complex electrical systems popping up on every influencer's feed. And now like that's kind of the norm and the trend. And it's very stylish to talk about those types of things. Do you really need them? Like that's the question is, and to stop myself, there's need and then there's want. Like if you're just a dude that wants to sit in his garage and build a truck because that's what you enjoy, cool.
Nothing wrong with that.
Nothing wrong with that. Like totally get it. But there's a lot of people that are making these modifications and trying to justify them under the pretense of actually using them.
And maybe the key to it is make sure that when you go onto Instagram, look up a bunch of travelers that are somewhere in the world.
Yeah.
So look at Dan Grech, or look at Graham and Louisa. They have some modifications on their vehicles, but they are very, very minimal in how they're modified. And then there's an equal number of them that are traveling around the world in stock Land Cruisers.
Or, I mean, there's people traveling around the world in minivans now, or on like I always love the motorcycle people because you just can't put that much crap on a bike. So it's so pure to me.
Yeah. And it works. And they go around the world.
Yeah.
I think when we look at Instagram, it's there's nothing wrong with following the fancy 4Runner build, but also follow the family, or like look at Ray and Marianne Hyland. They go the entire length of the Silk Road in a 1950s
Series 1, 54 Series 1, I think, that they restored on the road. Like their rear main seal was a leather hat from India.
That's right.
In India.
That's right. Exactly. And they didn't need any of the things that we're going to talk about. And they had an incredible experience as a family. If you look at some of these 4Runners or some of these Tacomas, they're $120,000, $130,000 vehicles. If you had bought a motorcycle, you could have bought the motorcycle, ridden around the world, had an incredible experience, and spent less money.
You brought up like the social pressure. It's almost like humans are competitive creatures.
Sure.
And we're trying to introduce competition into Overlanding or something. Like I have to have this, or this guy has this, and I'm going to get more likes. I mean, I now get ads for enthusiasts building their trucks just so they can get more. Like I've started taking screenshots of it because I don't believe that like Bob's 4Runner, like he's running ads to try and get
his numbers up,
to pump his numbers up, because that's what's like valuable. And that's like the concerning thing for me.
And isn't that just a vanity metric at the end of the day?
Yeah.
Like the number of followers is very much a vanity metric.
Yeah.
And fortunately
it's just interesting. Like it's really split. Like there's the travelers and the non-travelers. And this is a podcast for the travelers.
Sure.
This is for people that I don't think that you have to drive to, the Skeleton Coast or something. Like we're not saying that. It doesn't matter if you're just going out on the weekends.
You could never leave your state.
You can never leave your state. I mean, in Arizona, you could spend spend
a lifetime exploring this place.
Right?
Do the exploring, again, maybe coming back to asking, am I spending more money on the vehicle than I am on my experiences in life? If you start with that one, it's probably a pretty good balance.
Yeah.
Like I'm spending more money on fuel and buying groceries and getting my kids the hats and, headlamps that they need in order to go camping. And, like, are you spending money on the actual experience, or are you spending money on a set of lights that you'll probably never turn on other than to take some photos?
It's interesting.
Like
I had a, it's Baja seems to be like this very aspirational location for people to go in North America. And it's great. Like busy now, but it's great. And it seems that that's the impetus for a lot of these things. I need long travel because I'm going to Baja. I need these lights because I'm going to Baja. 9 out of 10 travelers I ask, do you drive at night in Baja?
It's not
only if I'm going to get beer.
It's not a good idea.
It's not a good idea.
Yeah, there's donkeys on the road, and I mean, people think it's like banditos or something, and like it's so rare that something like that actually. It's the fact that there's like a donkey on the road, or
drunk people and cattle.
Or a drunk person.
I post this Instagram rat, and I have all these like desert racers that are like, like we see these vans with 5, 6, 7 lights above the windshield. I'm like, yeah, we use that stuff when we're doing 120 mile an hour in a trophy truck or, class, whatever, because we run out of light. That van is not going to go over 25 mile an hour off road, lest a pan hit you in the back of the head. Like there's a house there, dude.
It's like, so
it's literally a modification that you only would need to go fast.
And the vehicle can't do that.
The vehicle is incapable of doing it. So it's modifications like that I look at and I'm just like, where is this coming from? And why is it such a fashion trend? Because when something isn't, I mean, I'm going to generalize here, but if it doesn't have a practical purpose, it's probably not unfair to call it a fashionable thing. You see this with so much stuff these days. And like how many, sun-faded Rotopacks are out there that have never had fuel or water in them?
Yeah.
I don't know.
I've never liked the idea of like having water on the side of your vehicle.
Oh, hey, do you want to come overlanding in Moab with us? And I'm like,
wheeling? We're going to go wheeling?
We're going to go four-wheeling? And that's fun. Totally fine.
That sounds fun.
It's fascinating.
So the lights is a good one. Let's start with the lights. Oh, actually, we decided the first thing that you don't need, that people tell you need, that you don't need to go overlanding is an Instagram account.
Yeah.
Like people have actually gone entirely around the world and no one has ever known other than their families that get like a text message update with some photos.
So selfish. It's so great. Like I love the community that Instagram has brought together.
Oh, big time. I totally enjoy it. But you don't need it and you don't need to broadcast your trips. It can just be about you and your family.
Yeah.
You can make it this personal journey of discovery and no one ever needs to know that you did it.
I mean, like you said, we've both been in this space for a while. On my side, I've been interviewing travelers for 10 years. And I have seen so many people ruin their trip because they're not actually I'm going to say this. Maybe it's controversial, but deep down inside, it doesn't feel like they're doing it for themselves.
Yeah.
It feels like they're doing it to prove it to somebody or to gain notoriety, get their 15 minutes of fame. And they spend more time documenting the trip for other people to bear witness to say, hey, I've done this, than they actually do enjoying their trip.
Yeah.
And I think that's the first thing that kind of goes wrong. Like if you're going through all this effort and it's not easy to travel overland around the world, like it's not easy to go through borders. It's not easy to do these things.
So I think it's like that balance of like, are you giving yourself enough time to enjoy the experience? Are you not, like you said, spending 40 hours a week for 1,000 people on Instagram? Like it's a lot of work.
Yeah.
You could be doing other things.
It really can be. And money to travel, like that's just we don't live in a utopia where
on the phone where you can see your screen time, it is such an incredible tool. And it was the reason why I took Instagram and everything off of my personal phone, is because I realized I was spending hours a day.
You habitually just start going to the app. Like I will delete my thing is I will delete the app when I'm busy. I can always re-download it.
Sure.
It doesn't get rid of my account. I can check it on my computer, but I've now started putting it in a folder because it's that simple second step. You don't see it and habitually click it.
Yeah. I think for me, like I only put them on there when I'm on the road because I don't, otherwise if I'm in the office and stuff, it just sits on the iPad because I want to have it be difficult to get on and start to scroll.
Yeah.
And I've gained so much time back and I've been able to use that for my health or to read during the day. And those are things that I love more than being on social media. All right. So that was the first thing is you don't actually need an Instagram account to go around the world. The next one, and we've talked about lights a little bit, but the next one on my list is long travel. So it's interesting how much, because it's extremely expensive. I mean,
and extremely, if you go on the Instagram, it's very common with non-traveling overlanders.
Yeah. Some of these long travel suspension kits are $7,000, $8,000, $9,000.
Yeah.
That is enough money to drive all the way to Panama and ship back. You can do that for $10,000. So.
And again, it's this split between the traveling overlanders and the the non-traveling overlanders. Like, I don't know how else to politely say it, but that's
and our hope is that someone that's listening that sees all of this pressure to get a long travel suspension and all of the arguments that these influencers make of why you should. And of course, all of those arguments are entirely false. You do not need, you can drive around the world in a stock Land Cruiser. Yeah. You can drive around the world in a stock Tacoma. Mm-hmm. You can do a lot of challenging back roads in both of those vehicles and never modify them at all. I think for us, it's about dispelling this myth that you do. Yeah. The reality is that this suspension systems are incredibly expensive. They're incredibly complex. They cannot be serviced internationally or in the field. So if you blow out that crazy coilover remote reservoir, whatever, and you're down in Honduras, you're not going to get a replacement. However, if you have a Tacoma or a 4Runner, there is a Prado 120 or Prado 150 that it'll swap directly over with. You take out the strut and you put it into your car and you're back on the road. Same thing with the Tacoma. But these crazy suspensions, how in the world do you fix them?
Well, so let's talk about how we got here. I think maybe where we can add some value is off-road industry, early 2000s, pre-running was whatever overlanding is now. It was like pre-running and rock crawling. You ended up with all of these companies, 2008, 2009, who started buying 4Runners, who started buying Tacomas, who started buying this. There was customers, and there was a myth created that you needed these items to go off-road through, again, very clever marketing and leveraging influential people in the industry. And it wasn't that long ago that definitely wasn't overlanding. Like, I remember when the cream of the crop was like old man emu suspension, because it still is, but it was durable, and they had different spring rates for adjusting ride height with different cargo capacities, and that was always kind of like the gold standard. And now it's like, I need to have these uniball upper control arms. They just squeak. The polyurethane
they rattle
bushings,
and squeak.
The polyurethane bushings and the uniball.
It works in a race truck where it's going to have a 500-mile service life, and then they're going to rebuild all of it. Mm-hmm. Like the thing that you drive back and forth to work, you don't want it to be squeaking and rattling on the 101 for your entire commute.
I understand that you need to, if you're going to lift your vehicle, you need to adjust your geometries and correct all that.
Of course. But again, lift the vehicle an inch or two and then put a slightly taller tire on it, an inch or two taller tire, and you're done. It's like, it's going to take you everywhere you want to go, and you're going to spend tens of thousands of dollars less. So there's nothing wrong with a suspension upgrade to match the payload that you have or the weight that you need in the vehicle. Level the vehicle, provide yourself with a little bit more ground clearance if that's important to you. And there's nothing even wrong with premium suspension. So instead of going with the bypass, remote reservoir, long travel with the hydraulic jounce and the upper control arms and the wide track and the additional CV, just go with a nice BP51 or like an Eibach, or just go with like
there's a lot of brands out there. Just keep it simple and serviceable.
Yeah, they're like $700.
Yeah.
They're like totally affordable.
The Mojave Road is not a race course.
Yeah, especially not a race course.
Like, that would actually be a great bumper sticker.
Yeah. Well, and that's the reality of it, is that national forest, most public lands that are, when you're on a dirt road, most of them have speed limits of 25 miles an hour.
Yeah.
So if you're going faster than 25 miles an hour, you're breaking the law and you're endangering the other recreationists that are out there with you. So
and there's this whole movement. Like, if you want to drive really, really fast off road through the desert, have you ever heard of desert racing?
Exactly. You can actually do that.
Yeah. Exactly. And you can go by you could get into desert racing in in a Volkswagen Bug. I mean, look at like
Class 11.
Emmy Hall just ran the Hoopty class at the Mint 400.
Awesome. So
she's
awesome.
into that Miata, maybe 10 grand.
Yeah.
That is the cost of suspension on, some of these
on one corner
on some of these trucks. Yeah. If you have that disposable income, go racing.
Do something different.
But we're making these overlanding's hot. The off-road industry changed. This was the new trend.
Yeah.
And all of these rock crawling companies and desert racing companies and this and that and pre-runner guys, they all jumped on this bandwagon, right?
Sure.
So now like the American Overland truck is like the suspension's desert racer, the gearing's rock crawler. It's got 37s on it. It has trophy truck lights. Like it has all of these things that were never really intended
or needed to begin with. Yeah, sure. The only time that I've ever had to have an extremely modified vehicle is in the high latitudes. So like if you're crossing Greenland, you got to have 44s. You're not going to make it.
Yeah. You have to run it. 3 PSI?
Yeah. Or less.
Yeah.
There were many days that we ran less than that. You just don't need a heavily modified vehicle. I mean, the 70 series trucks that we used for E7, they had a 50 millimeter lift. Like they went from a 235 85 to a 255 85. Yep. That was it. Like
same exact setup I put on my Troopy.
And it worked. Like it worked everywhere in the world, including the canning stock route and challenging terrain. The only place it didn't work was Antarctica. We had to put on big tires. That was it.
Yeah.
So
kind of needed little pizza cutters on snow.
Is it going to work? It isn't going to work.
Yeah.
Okay. So there, we've covered the long travel, save the 10 grand, put it in your,
if you're buying a race truck,
college fund.
That's awesome. Go buy a race truck.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. So the next thing we have on our list is the beadlocks.
Oh God, I hate them. Like I love them because they're this like very technical, like I see the appeal. And I think we should stay.
Although we have both had them. Like I had Hutchinson's because I wanted them forever.
Very few. Yeah.
And they were the worst wheels I've ever had in my life. I could not get them balanced despite the effort.
Yeah.
So did you ever get yours balanced?
I figured out how to balance them.
Okay.
There's two kinds of beadlocks, right? The Hutchinson's that Scott and I are talking about are an actual proper beadlock.
Yeah, they capture the inner and outer bead.
Yes.
And they can even have a run flat.
3-piece beadlock. So that one portion of the wheel has a seal in it and actually unbolts. So you could plop the tire on, an insert actually goes into it, and then the face of the wheel sandwiches it together.
Yep.
For simplification, that's how it works. Then there's beadlocks that provide on the outside lip a little additional grip surface, right? I mean, they just prevent the outside of the tire from rolling off. There's no protection on the inside. If you're going to run beadlocks, run an actual beadlock. Don't just put a...
Well, some of them do. Some of them do have the outer beadlocks. They do capture the entire bead of the tire.
But how are they capturing the inside? Like what's preventing it from pushing in?
There's a face, and then the outer ring clamps it to the outer face of the wheel. But to your point, the inner bead is not retained.
So it's half beadlock.
It's like half locked. It is in the area that you need it the most because when you're coming up against a rock, you're pressing up against a rock.
Yeah.
It's going to be trying to de-bead the outer rim, part of the rim. Or if you're turning on sand and snow or at high speed on the dirt at low pressures, all of that pressure is put on the outer bead, most of it.
Here's what I've learned about beadlocks is when we went to Tuktoyaktuk this summer, we needed to rotate tires. We couldn't find anybody to touch it because there were beadlocks, even though they were DOT compliant beadlocks. I mean, the U.S. military runs these particular things. Not a single tire shop in Canada or Alaska I'm sure that there would have been some guy or whatever, but you're passing through, you're traveling and you end up with who you end up with.
If you go to Canadian Tire, they're not going to touch it.
Wouldn't touch it. They were also Continental MPTs and these nasty
tires,
things. Like definitely could have found, I could have found somebody, but you couldn't just like roll in easy, So serviceability for those is questionable.
And they require a lot more maintenance than people think. The one failure that I've had with a beadlock is because I didn't do that every 500 mile torque check on the bolts, and I had some bolt heads break off.
It took me a while.
Instant flat.
Yeah, it took me a while when we were back from this trip and we replaced the tires. And this isn't to comment on the shop that did it, but it took them multiple times to get it right because they're just so finicky. Everything's got to be perfect. You have you're trying to sandwich this wheel face into the inner ring, and sometimes that the O-ring comes out of its channel.
They're brutal.
It's brutal.
They take a lot of work, and I wanted them so badly on my G-Wagon, and I could not wait to get them off. Like I could not get them to balance for a daily driver. Driving around Prescott, it was fine. Driving off road, it was amazing. But they were super heavy. They were super expensive. So my G-Wagon didn't have a lot of power or big brakes like yours did. So like it stopped poorly. It accelerated even worse.
My last G-Wagon had smaller brakes and less horsepower.
Yeah, that's true.
And it had bead locks. Do as we say, not as we do.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing though. Like the reason why we're saying all of this stuff is I have literally made every single one of these mistakes. Yeah. Everything on this list, I have screwed up royally. And that's why I'm thinking like, how many trips did I not take, or how many experiences did I give up to have some, or even the time it takes to put this stuff on? It's like it's the time me. It takes something from us.
I'm getting so tired of just managing all of these systems on a vehicle.
Yeah. So bead locks, they do have their place in extreme rock crawling. They are cool. We totally agree that they're cool.
They look great.
But even when we were running at 2 PSI on 44s in Antarctica, we did not have bead locks.
Yeah.
They use like a special kind of mounting fluid that creates a little bit of adhesion as it dries.
Okay. Interesting.
And then there are new wheel designs. Method, for example, has they're not affiliated with the podcast. It's just that they have
trail grip or some knurling
bead grip technology, where they have tighter tolerances to the tire, so slightly oversized, so it puts more pressure on it. And then it has like this little scalloping along the surface that creates some additional grip.
I cannot see somebody traveling overland that would need more than that, because they don't need it to begin with, but it's a completely passive technology. It doesn't add any weight.
And here's the other thing too. I have had tires come off the bead. Absolutely. Like multiple times in my travels. I would say less than 5 times. It is never difficult to get it back on. Like you clean out the wheel, you run a ratchet strap around the center of the carcass, you tighten it up so it starts to force the beads out.
Yep.
And then you spray some water on it and you kind of shake the tire back and forth as you're adding air. And it's like next thing you know.
And how many of those times are in sand, full throttle, full lock, trying to get a cool photo?
Yeah, probably most of them. One that comes to mind specifically, that was that with a heavy 200 series Land Cruiser. It's just not a big deal when it happens.
Yeah.
And then it's something that you learn, or you just put on your spare, you take it to the next tire shop you see, and they fix it for you.
Yeah.
It's just not a big deal.
Let's use Baja, for example. There is a tire shop every
there's more tire shops than gas stations.
Feet.
Yeah, that's right.
Like there's a
little Yantaria that's like right there. Yeah. And there's usually a great taco shop right next door. You stop, you get your tire fixed, you have a taco. Life is fantastic. So that's bead locks. All right, we do have lights next. Oh, people love their lights though. They just love them. It's a safety thing. It's a safety thing is why you have to have them.
You have to be able to see.
Yep.
You have to.
Yes.
So I started actually thinking about this, and I don't drive at night. Like generally speaking, I'm exploring during the day. I'm driving from A to B. Yeah. And when you're traveling and you're camping.
Yeah.
So like I do think like scene lights, like a light on your truck,
or backup
lights or backup light. Like I think that stuff's incredibly useful. But why does your van have trophy truck lights on it?
I think it's because it looks cool.
It looks cool.
That's got to be what it is. Or someone told them that they needed to have them. Or it's like, oh, there's animals on the road in Baja. It's really not a good idea to be driving at night in Baja. It's just not a good idea. Those roads are very narrow. You
don't really drive at night in Africa either.
You don't really drive at night anywhere, because the reason why we're traveling is to see things. At night, you don't get to experience anything.
Yeah.
So like on the occasion that you have to drive at night, just drive a little slower.
Yeah.
Just which you should be doing anyways at night.
Yeah.
Just drive a little bit slower.
Like if you're just having fun and you're building a truck, we're not like actually talking to you. Again, I'm going to reiterate this. I'm going to continually reiterate this. This is an overland podcast for travelers.
Yeah.
Right. And what we're trying to make sure that people know is, despite of everything you see and professional opinions, so-called professional opinions, you don't I guess on my last big trip, I was in 24-hour sunlight for like a month. So I didn't really have
That's another thing.
So if you're staying in North America and you're traveling north in the summer, you're never going to use them. And then if you're traveling south in the winter, you're probably not going to be driving at night.
The other thing that I found is I put all of those fancy lights on top of my Tacoma. As soon as you turn them on, it was undrivable because it was so much reflection off of the hood, and it like filled the entire cab with this insane glow.
On the Gladiator, I had this like empty space between the roof of the cab and the camper, and I'm like, okay, fine. Like everybody's telling me I need to put a light bar there, so I put a super fancy light bar there. It was incredibly impressive when I used it in my driveway. I never actually was in a situation where I could use it because, and this actually goes somewhere. So I was never in a situation where I could use it because it was just too bright. Like you can only use it off-road. No one can be in front of you. Yeah. Because if you're on a trail run or you're traveling with a friend and you turn that on, they did not have eyeballs anymore. like the light was going to hit their rear view mirror and it was going to vaporize their eyes. Like it's not to say that the technology is not cool or whatever, but I won't put another one on because there were so few situations in which I could actually use it that the juice wasn't worth the squeeze.
And modern vehicles have such great headlights now.
Oh my God. The Prospector, like the headlights turn, lighting technology is one of those things that does trickle down. The new Jeep Wrangler with the LED lights, they're just really good.
Really good.
I've broken the golden rule and I've driven, the one time I drove at night in Baja, south of San Felipe, I was coming north and the gas station in Gonzaga was closed for like lunch.
Like it always is, yeah.
Yeah, like closed for dinner or something, and we had to wait for 2 hours, and that we wanted to make it to San Felipe. The only weird experience I've ever had in Baja is this was a couple years ago, and it was after the hurricane came through and washed out all the bridges south of San Felipe, between San Felipe and Gonzaga. And I had a dude like in his car, like, I don't know what was really going on, and I don't want to say carjacking, and I don't want to say those things, but there's really only
super unusual.
There's only really one reason that a Corolla, like a clapped out Corolla, pulls in front of you when you're going around. Think of it as in like an underpass, like the bridge was washed out. So they were like, I'm going to say hiding under there, pull out in front of me, and then a guy with another thing comes out with like a strobe flashlight trying to blind me. So then that was the one time I used my lights because I'm driving really fast back to San Felipe. But I pull into San Felipe and a Federale tries to shake me down because I have auxiliary lights on my car that aren't covered. Yeah. And then a Mexico City guy comes over and it's like, just leave now. He's like, he was trying, do you know why he was doing that? He's like, you had your auxiliary lights on and I only had two little like small auxiliary. This is pre-light bar. And I got shaken down. It wasn't worth it.
Wasn't worth the squeeze.
Yeah. So like in Mexico, from what the Federale told me is that it is illegal to have uncovered auxiliary lights on your vehicle. Yeah. And they can and will shake you down
when you're on the road for sure.
Even though I think I forgot which ones I had on the Jeep. Like, weren't they like the factory, like
could be
Jeep
factory
Performance
fogs,
Part 1? They're literally like a factory light. They're targets for theft. Like, I mean, you can get those berry nuts and there's ways to lock them on there, but
it's a lot of money.
Driving lights and a set of fog lights. Nobody's talking about that. And
that's a great place to start, or even start with putting in some premium fog lights. Yeah. And then drive the car and see how it works. Yeah. And like, oh, this works really nice and I'm done. And then maybe you consider a nice set of driving lights. Mm-hmm. The 6 light bars, the light bar inside the hood, the light bar on top of the, like,
and then on the lights too, is people replace the fog lights with some kind of drop-in LED pod, but they don't do the SAE, Society of Automotive Engineers, approved. So basically, like, it's a way of saying that it's road legal. Sure. The pattern is dispersed enough. Doesn't mean that it's not bright, but it's dispersed enough that you can actually use it on the road. So let's say like you're not driving around the world and you're a normal person like we all are, and it's foggy outside and you hit your fog lights and all of a sudden, one, you can't see because fog lights are meant to, they're very specific in how they work to cut through the fog
and everything. Yeah.
And the cutoff and everything. So now you just can't see and the people in front of you can't see. Because they're blinded by this like yellow orb of light. So then you end up with a vehicle that's in the practical situation where on the road, you're actually going to use them. You can't.
Yeah. So it's even less practical.
Like,
yeah. So the lights are another one. They really are. I just think like
super cool on a trophy truck.
Save that money for gas.
Something. And this isn't to bash on, to having some good driving lights and whatever, like
just something practical.
You know, like
something that you'll actually use.
It came with old Hellas. I updated them to Baja Designs. I put an LP6. I kept the factory Hella fogs that when I say factory, they were Earth Roamer
in the bumper. Yeah.
Because I didn't want to really do one. I would have to fabricate brackets and how they mounted was a little obscure. I don't use them.
Yeah.
Like I'm probably going to take my LP9s off because I would benefit from cooling on hills more than I would benefit from a second set of
That's another thing
lights.
too. Lights can really reduce your cooling effectiveness.
Yeah. You put a bumper on the front, you put a winch on front, you know, and then you start putting light bars in your grill or big lights in front of impeding the airflow and the directiveness of that.
Yeah. Even creating weird vacuums and pressure systems.
It's stuff to consider.
No, so true about the lights. Okay, this next one's kind of fun because it's a little bit contentious.
Okay.
Because it's the mud terrain thing.
Oh,
like I've never the mud terrain thing is interesting because when you put a set of mud terrains on your vehicle, they're going to cost more to begin with. They'll be more expensive than all terrains. They are going to be heavier than all terrains, typically. They are going to reduce your fuel economy even more than an all terrain would because of the rolling resistance. They're going to be loud when you put them on new, and then they're going to howl like a banshee after about 20,000 miles once they start to wear out. You see them all over the place in the desert. You just don't need a mud tire in the desert. Now, if you live in the Pacific Northwest, it's probably a good idea to have a mud tire.
Or you live in Kentucky. Yeah. Like, I mean, I'm from Illinois, where four-wheeling for me, going off-road meant making a farmer very angry in his country lane. And if you showed up with all-terrain tires, you weren't getting through, God, it was like the mud pit on Swanberg Road or something, like whatever. It was like the obstacle. Mud terrains have a purpose.
Totally. But just make sure you're using them, again, not because someone else has them on their vehicle.
The best argument I've ever heard for mud terrains was from Chris Collard. Used to be editor of OJ, very accomplished traveler. And he was in the 80 series in
Panama or Guatemala or something.
I think it was in Guatemala. And he was like going to all of these very remote Mayan ruins that were down there. And I don't think I think that truck had ATs.
It did.
And kept getting stuck because you're driving through a jungle.
Yeah.
So if your trip involves...
I think it also was impacted by the fact that it had lockers and you didn't know it. So when you have a factory locked 80 series and...
I only drove that truck to get beer. So
yeah. But the mud terrains would have made it... You wouldn't need lockers if you had mud terrains.
Yeah, arguably. But, you know, like there are cases where if you're doing a specific trip where it's going to be grassy, muddy and whatever, like cool.
Put the mud tires on there.
But for us guys in the Southwest,
fuel economy goes down, expense goes up, noise goes up.
Number one complaint we have with the Earth Roamer is actually those MPTs. Yeah. It's when I say the only tire, I don't mean like it's the best choice. I mean like it is the only tire that fits the vehicle and has the load thing. But if they had that in like a more milder terrain tire, like an AT, and I didn't have these huge lugs, the car would ride better, it would track better. Yeah.
It'd be better on icy roads. It'd be better on wet roads.
Yeah.
All of those things are...
And they come out of balance. Like mud terrain tires come out of balance.
Yeah.
And when a vehicle, the tires or let's say the wheels are out of balance, that puts more wear on your ball joints, tie rod ends, like all this stuff, which when you're a traveler, generally you don't want to have to change your ball joints in Bolivia. Ball joints in Bolivia, that sounds trendy. Ball joints are a pain to change anywhere.
Yeah.
You know, like get through your trip. Like I'll hear the argument for mud terrains in some situations.
Well, there's totally reasons to have them. It's just, if you don't live in a place where there's a lot of mud, why do that to yourself?
Yeah.
Again, I think it is fashion.
Yeah. Like if you're just rolling around Miami.
There's also some really good hybrid tires.
Yeah, they're
slightly more aggressive.
What are they calling them? They're calling them like the RTs or they're hybrids.
Yeah.
I think that stuff like that
could be a nice
makes
option.
a lot of sense, especially with modern tire tech and
totally. So much better now. Yeah. All right. So this was one that I came up with because I've literally never understood it. So you have an SUV with two people, an individual and their partner, and they're in a Land Cruiser and they are pulling a trailer that has a roof tent on the top of it. I have never understood why somebody would
riff on this because I got my response. You keep going.
I have never understood why somebody would tow their roof tent. Just put the roof tent on top of the car. Now, there are exceptions to this, right? So let's say you've got a family of 5 in the same Land Cruiser. You probably do need a trailer to carry all the stuff for your family and to make sure you have enough food. But if you've got a solo traveler or 2 people in a Land Cruiser and they're pulling a roof tent, it makes no sense to me. You did mention your retort, which I think is totally valid. But I think that to spend $30,000 on something that carries the roof tent that you could just put on your car.
Yeah.
You could take all those systems that are in that trailer and put them in your vehicle easily.
Yeah.
And save yourself, let's call it $20,000. It's a lot of money.
Yeah, for sure.
And fuel economy drops. In California, you can only drive 55 miles an hour on the highways. There's like all these. Try backing up a trailer for a quarter mile on a shelf road.
No. You know what I would do in that situation? I would unhook it and drive away, crying.
Yeah. So it's not saying no trailers. I think if you're going to tow a trailer, it should bring a luxury with it that you cannot.
I want to sleep inside of it.
That you can't have in your car.
It's really like that Patriot X3 is nice.
Super nice.
As much as it's a tent, you're actually living inside of it.
Yeah.
And you have heat and you have all of that.
You have a heater, you've got a little dinette area, you got a table, you got a big, huge queen size bed with a regular mattress. Yeah, it has a heater on the inside, or like a teardrop, where I stayed in this Escapade teardrop trailer the other day, and it was howling wind, 40-mile-an-hour winds outside of Phoenix, and I heard nothing. It was totally silent.
And it's nice.
It was super nice.
I don't personally, I would never tow something that, again, didn't offer me, we'll call it the luxury of sleeping inside. It doesn't really make sense. But where I think that trailers like that do make sense is if you want to go out on the weekends, and let's say you have an F-250 Tremor, or you've got a stock pickup truck or whatever that is, and you don't really want to mess with it, and you're building out your trailer. I kind of get that. Like I kind of understand it.
But some of these roof tents now, like some of the iCamper ones, they have these quick disconnects.
Yeah.
Like you can have that roof tent on there in less time than it would take to hook up
I think the argument is garages. I've got to park in a garage at home, or maybe you live in a city where people have sticky fingers, and you want to keep everything in your garage. Like I see it, but I do agree with you.
Like highly specialized situation, or if you've got a family of 5 and a 4Runner, you probably do need a trailer.
Because you're at payload with people.
So it's the only way you can add additional payload is to go against gross combined vehicle weight rating as opposed to just gross vehicle weight rating. So if you're looking at a trailer, it should offer something that you cannot do easily in the vehicle, which means you should be able to sleep inside it. It should have a heater. Even better, it has a bathroom, like something that literally makes it worthwhile to haul that thing around with your car and take like the 3-4 mile per gallon hit and all the other downsides to towing a trailer. When I tow this Explorer trailer, like I'm happy to tow it because it is so comfortable. And I can work in it. It has a bathroom. I can spend a week working out of it comfortably, heater, air conditioner. It's amazing, but I would never want to do that just to haul around a roof tent. So something to think about. Don't spend that 20, 30 grand on a trailer that basically is just a roof tent mount.
Although I do want an OG AT Chaser for some reason.
Because they're awesome.
Because they're like, I don't know. I think they're super.
I
think they're like this OG. Like I think we're entering this period where like overlanding and whatever we're calling it now has been around for long enough that you're starting to kind of get classic stuff in the segment. And I'm like super into it.
Behind your LJ, that thing would be so sick.
We'll do another podcast on the LJ, but it's the coolest one in the world.
Yes, it is the coolest LJ. So doesn't mean don't do the trailer, but think about like, really, am I bringing some benefit with it? Probably not, especially given the expense. Okay, the next one is this oversized recovery gear. This one is really interesting to me because people they'll put a 12,000 pound winch on their Wrangler. You want the winch to be 1.5 to 2 times gross vehicle weight. So, and it depends on your use case, but there are reasons for that because the winch will be heavier. The winch will have heavier cable that isn't necessary for the load. You'll end up with less cable on the drum. You're going to have a higher amp draw that you don't need. And you can use mechanical advantage in other ways using pulley blocks and other stuff like that.
I'll speak on the straps and stuff is that if you have a strap that's meant for an earth roamer and you use it on a 4Runner, what ends up happening is that the part you want to, like the strap should always be considered sacrificial. That is what you actually want to fail. What you do not want to fail are the bolts or the welds on your recovery point that then turns into a projectile.
Yeah.
Right. So
or damages your frame.
Yeah. Like that's one of the reasons why when we were doing the whole recovery kit, MaxRex, we actually started doing fused soft shackles because so many people in Australia were like, again, throwing the 20,000 kilogram, billion pound strap on their Hilux, and it was ripping bumpers off.
And one of the reasons why it rips the bumper off is because the strap is designed for a vehicle with a specific gross vehicle weight. Yeah. So if you go with the 4-inch recovery strap that's designed for a Super Duty and you use it with your Suzuki Samurai, you are not going to get that 15 to 20% stretch out of it. You will with the Super Duty because it's
You're not going to be able to pull it. You're not going to be able to stretch it.
So you're not going to get the kinetic benefit of the strap, which is going to put a significant increased load on all of the connection points, and the recovery will be less effective.
Yep.
So use the recovery equipment, use the size winch, the winch rope, the recovery gear that's appropriate to your vehicle or the vehicles that you travel with. And you'll end up with spending less money. The kit will weigh less. You'll end up with better recovery results. And most important, you're not causing a whole bunch of safety concerns along the way.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. That's a smart one.
Yeah, that's a good one. And then this is the last that I have on the list because it's your favorite.
Which one's this?
It's the overkill electrical systems.
Oh, God, it drives me crazy.
So we're going to end with the coup de grace.
I guess maybe 2 years ago, 3 years ago, it started becoming, lithium started to come onto the scene. And with lithium batteries, they have a lot of advantages. They're much more energy dense and, their depth of discharge is near 100%. Versus an AGM or any kind of flooded lead acid battery is about 50%.
Yeah, the lithiums have controllers on them.
Yeah,
so they protect the battery.
Lithium's great. And the problem is that on some alternators, they're not going to consistently charge. So you need a DC to DC. Basically is just taking a little bit more amperage from the, the vehicle when it's running, and it's uprating it to a higher voltage with less amperage. So, you'll see 20, 30, 40 amp lithium chargers. Well, then people started putting trailer systems in their 4Runner or their Tacoma. And I was one of those people. I put a full system, like it had 4 or maybe 6 water tank outputs. It had all of these different things. And it was such a problem. Remember you guys took it up to Utah.
Yeah, it just didn't work.
And the little clips, even though they had screws, you have to shoehorn these things, so
they're heavy and they're big.
They're heavy. And you end up with 2 of these things that are about 18 inches long by 10 inches high. And then you have to shove this somewhere. And then all of the ensuing cables. Not a problem when you're putting it into a caravan or a trailer or, some kind of expedition camper or something like that.
And those things need to have power management at that level of complexity because they're complex systems. But
most people end up putting some of these systems by the time they're installed are $10,000.
Yeah.
There's $5,000 of just parts.
Yeah.
So oftentimes, and the labor is expensive because it has to be done right. And there's some shops that are doing really good work, but they end up with a really overkill thing to turn on a 3-watt LED light and to run their fridge and things like that. And I just why? I just don't understand why people are putting
it must just
trailer
be the jewelry
systems. Thing. Yeah. Is it because it's trendy? And again, you start to trend to this fashion accessory, and a fashion accessory that's very overkill. There's nothing.
Well, and it's not even just we talked about the recovery stuff. That was overkill problem. This is unnecessary complexity.
It's actually defeating the purpose.
I think what I have experienced in most cases around power management systems is that within a very short period of time that they don't work. And you always know the guy in camp because he's fiddling and he's pissed off and his solar panel's not charging or he goes out and his auxiliary battery's flat because it hasn't been working, and then his fridge is shutting off and his food's spoiling.
It's like you're describing me with my Gladiator.
Yeah.
It was so I would get to camp and the diesel heater is not working. Why is the diesel heater not working? Oh, because it blew a fuse on this thing and then it did this. And then
go with the most simple solution first. And there are degrees of that. We were talking before the podcast about when I got to spend time with Tom Shepard in the UK, and he was showing me his G-Wagon that he had driven all over Northern Africa. And I said, do you have an auxiliary battery? He says, I do, because I want to make sure that I can start the vehicle if the main battery fails. And I do run some accessories off of that, like my radios and my GPS units. And I says, well, how do you manage that? And he flips the seat forward, and there was a mechanical, like literally a dial.
One of those Blue Sea things.
That's right. It's like a Blue Sea dial, and it has a position that says off, which disconnects both batteries completely from the system. So that's now a security device. You turn it in the off position, you can't start the car, nothing works. Or you could go into position 1, which is just day-to-day driving, or you could go into position 2, which was now only your house systems, or you could combine them where it said all. And he said the reason why he does that is it makes him pay attention to his battery system. He checks on stuff. Yeah. He checks the gauges. He's participating in the process. Now, the next step up from that is just a very simple DC to DC charging system. Yeah. They're very small and compact. They're not that expensive. They take power from your alternator, and they provide 20, 25, 30 amps.
Yeah, there's a lot of great options out there for them.
And a lot of times they have solar power inputs, and they are super simple. They're very inexpensive. Yeah. They can be installed, maintained, and serviced. And then there are like also very simple ones that just use starter solenoid relays. And they just, once the voltage hits a certain level from the alternator, it combines it. Yeah. And then it's charging. Yeah. So really going simple, I think, is the key on those things.
I see a lot of people that are doing, like the wedge style campers. They go so overkill on this stuff, and they end up spending, an equivalent amount of money to a 4-wheel camper having a trailer or something, and they have a quarter of the space. Like we had that AT Summit on the Gladiator, and it was really good. Like it was well insulated. It was well made. Like I truthfully enjoyed it. The mistake that I made was deviating too far from stock. Yeah. Like from AT, it came with, kind of some power switches. It came with USB charger. It came with a
little
lighter, a light. Yeah. You could have a fan put in. You could have all that. And then you literally had like a cable, quick disconnect. If you wanted to take the camper off, you could. It all went downhill from that, because what I tried to do is I tried to turn what was a simple camper, like a wedge camper is inherently simpler than a sliding camper. Yeah, sure. Let's just build on that. And you're trying to really get the slide-in camper, you end up spending more money, and you end up with, I had a 5-foot bed. A lot of guys that are doing these wedge campers have 5.5 foot beds. You can't put 10 pounds of stuff in a 5-pound bag. Yeah. So you end up with like, oh, is that storage? No, that's an electrical compartment. Oh, is that storage? No, that's another electrical compartment. Oh, what's that? Well, that's where I keep my battery. Oh, so where do you keep your stuff? Yeah. And then you end up building cabinets out, and then you end up building this out, and then you end up putting a heater, and then you're over payload, and then you've spent 30 or 40 grand, and you should have just bought the slide-in camper. Like I mean, people like projects. I love projects. I enjoy doing some of it, but
this is another thing that people are told that they need that they don't.
Yeah, they see it. It goes back to like,
that's the key, is that you can buy the $70 Blue Sea switch
ACR. Yeah.
And you can click, 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 and you're done. Or they have the Blue Sea ACR, which is super simple.
Yeah, because I think that one has an auto setting.
It does have an auto setting. Yeah. That one's very cool. Yeah. And very inexpensive, a couple $100, and you're done. I think it's really about making sure that we're not overcomplicating the vehicle, and we're not just monkey see, monkey do on something that we see on Instagram. And that we save that money for traveling.
Exactly.
Matt, you're going to have your wrap up. But for me, my wrap up is there's nothing wrong with doing any of this stuff. You can do everything on our list, enjoy it, have a wonderful time, take all the pleasure that comes from a hobby that you love. Yeah. But what I was hoping to achieve with this podcast was that for those that were on the fence, for those that were unsure if they should spend the money on these things, or they're not sure what they should spend money on, you don't need to spend money on any of it. A stock 200 series Land Cruiser will take you around the world. There's nothing to be done. Just go and enjoy. Travel if that's your goal. If you enjoy building vehicles and you enjoy accessories and you enjoy making something that's a reflection of your personality or whatever, that's fine too. Yeah. But I really wanted this to be about, if you go down this list and you spend all that money, you're going to spend 60, 70, 80 grand of stuff on a vehicle that you don't need. Yeah. And I'd love for people to spend, even half of that
time traveling,
half of that on actually traveling.
Yeah. Many things in life for me come down to need versus want. When people ask me questions, that's a really particular thing for me. When they say, I need this, my mind defaults to simplify, because my experience as a traveler has taught me that simple is almost always better than complex.
And I think in all of life,
generally speaking, right?
Yeah.
So when somebody comes up to me and they're like, oh yeah, I need to get lights and I need to get this and I need to get this and I need to get this. I'm like, you don't need it if you want it. Totally. Go for it, man. Like,
enjoy it.
Like there's things that I want and there's things that I buy that not like, it doesn't always have to make sense. Right.
Oh, I think most of the things that I buy, even though I live very minimalist.
Yeah.
Almost everything that I buy, I don't need.
I am not a minimalist.
Mic drop here, folks. If you were wondering if Matt was a minimalist or not.
No, and again, I think the thing is that this podcast isn't directed towards the builder or the non-traveling overlander. Like they're almost just a different breed now.
Yeah.
But don't let we're trying to create an audience and things for travelers. That is what we are passionate about.
Yep.
And what I like to think that this podcast is actually about. It's one of the few remaining like actual overland travel things. Like it's weird. It's this fine line. And there's no judgment. There's some messages that I had that I'm like, oh, well, you're being really gatekeepy on this or whatever. I'm like, yeah, a little bit, 100%. But I'm also talking, this overlanding word has always been so ambiguous and it's been very unclear. If you were the builder, the non-traveling overlander, like I'm not criticizing you. I will say like recognize what you need and what you don't need.
Yeah. And then be careful if the lights over preaching it to others.
Yeah. Hopefully to the travelers out there, which again is who this podcast is for. Hopefully there is something of value there.
Oh, I think so. And it's really, like you said, needs versus wants.
Yeah.
And making sure that we're spending more money traveling than we are on the truck.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of the message.
Yeah. Cause if
it's fun, it was fun for us to riff on all these. I mean, and again, like I want to close with this. Everything on the list I have done wrong.
Yeah, me too.
So I'm literally just trying, maybe if we save one, Matt, if we can just save one.
Save one.
Yeah. Make all it. So thank you all for listening and we'll talk to you next time.